Welcome to the Practice Leader Podcast, brought to you by Ascent, a show for medical practice administrators who feel stuck in the daily chaos and want to lead with intention. I'm Zed Williamson, founder and CEO of Physician Growth Accelerator.
And I'm Paul Richards, president of Ascent and director of otolaryngology at the University of Utah School of Medicine. Every week, we explore what high-performing leaders are doing in real time, so you can stop reacting and start leading with purpose, strategy, and results.
So much of your day can be handling last-minute issues. Something pops up now, deal with it now. There is something, though, that if you don't plan for far in advance, whether you're invited to a seat at the table for the discussions or not, it can really cause harm in the future. And that's why we're speaking with our guest today, Nick Hernandez. He's the founder and CEO of ABISA, an independent healthcare consultancy specializing in healthcare strategy, physician engagement, and strategic growth initiatives. Nicky, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And the topic I'm talking about is acquisitions. I know that this can come up, and last minute, quick decisions, hurry up and get this done is not the way that world works. Am I off base putting it that way?
You are exactly correct. When it comes to selling your practice, best case scenario, really talking about a 12-month process from the very beginning. If it's a larger practice, it can take closer to 2 years.
Yeah. And I know that I'm really excited to have you on the show today because the perspective you bring to the table is different than most, because you actually were a practice administrator in your history, correct? And now you're helping practices with these types of things. From a practice administrator's point of view, what are the things that they should be thinking about kind of large term regarding acquisition of their practice?
One of the big things, I think, for starters is to focus on the doc or doctors that you have, and usually has to do revolve around age. Sometimes could be some health issues, and to really be thinking ahead. If you have a solo practice is solo physician practice or a solo physician owner, or it can be a little tricky. For example, if with regards to timelines, aside from what I said that it could take easily a year, for those that are interested in selling to private equity in today's world, they want those physicians to work for 5 years. So 5 plus 1, right, is 6. So the doctors that want to sell their practice exclusively to private equity and think from today that, they only want to work for 2 more years, it's not going to happen if they're a solo physician owner. So those are challenges there. If they're going to sell to another practice or hospital, that's completely different. Generally speaking, the hospitals will employ the physician for 3-year terms. And generally speaking, if they wanted to sell to another practice, it's all over the board. If they wanted to be employed physician or partners or et cetera like that. So there's a lot more flexibility if they wanted to sell to another practice. So that's a long way of saying that the time horizon of the physicians that want to work is really where the administrators can come into play to kind of nudge them along, making sure that the doctors are kind of starting to think ahead about potential succession planning and exit strategies down the road. It's better just to have an earlier conversation, even if they're not quite ready yet, and then table it for a few years.
Yeah. I'm curious, Paul, have you ever come across conversations with other administrators where an acquisition is either in the works or they know it's coming, but they're not really part of the conversation? Have you ever talked to someone who's been in that position?
Completely left out. No clue what's going on behind the physician closed doors. I've totally seen that. And then I've seen the other side where maybe they were a little bit more forefront. They kind of knew what to help guide them. But those that were totally blindsided, it's very, it's a hard experience just because of these things you're saying, these timelines, they could be in for a long haul and they weren't expecting that. So, but yeah, that's my kind of question is how do you get involved to be part of those conversations with your physician group or physician?
So a lot of things, I think, it's a really good question, Paul. So a lot of good things revolving around what a good administrator would do. discussions, that they would normally have with their accountant and their attorney, and even just with the doc in general. I mean, the administrator's not dumb. The administrator knows what the challenges are with a particular physician, i.e., if there's health challenges or there was a divorce, or just the fact that the physician is starting to get older, and just introduce your thoughts on those matters to the physician. I mean, the docs really do respect the administrators. So even if they're not wanting to be open about it, they'll listen. They'll absolutely listen. So just make the suggestion and start to have a conversation. It's kind of like it's like a marriage counselor, I would say. You're not going to come across and, like a judge do a summary verdict and the doc's just going to run with whatever you say. I mean, these are a big potential who moved my cheese moment for the doctor to try to sell. So unlike a summary judgment from a judge, more like a marriage counselor where you're starting to kind of drop little hints to the doc, you know what I mean? And kind of hope they have that conversation. Again, even if they're not having the conversation with you, I guarantee you the doc is listening and taking this home. Maybe they're talking it to their spouse. Maybe they're talking with their sibling who's also a physician or an accountant or something along those lines. And at the end of the day, it's all for the best. It really is. Even the administrator, right? Because what we really want to avoid is the worst case scenario, which is time sneaks up on the doctor and there is no alternative other than to shut the practice down. And when that happens, all the patients are told to seek care elsewhere, and everybody, to include the administrator, will lose their job because the business is closed up. So it's in the administrator's best interest to have those conversations.
Well, what drives and maybe you haven't come across this enough to know the answer to this, but I'm curious, what drives the desire to not have someone part of the conversation early on? Is that guidance that typically would come from either buyers or potential merging partners? Where does that typically come from?
The doc, the doc that sometimes just wants to keep everything close to their chest, which is odd because administrators, have total access to all the financial stuff, which is insanely important and integral to the practice. They usually have complete access to anything legal that's going on, good or bad. So they just, when it comes to actually wanting to give up the ship, they just, for some reason, just keep that particular conversation close to their chest. And I will say that just as anecdotally, unfortunately, in today's world in private practice, just anecdotally, I would say that probably maybe at best, maybe a third at best of the administrators are even a part of this discussion.
What about I'm thinking of private equity, and the perception is that if you do sell to private equity, that the administrator may, after a year, after they've kind of taught the new company the ins and outs of the office and things and practice, that they may be out of a job. So, and I don't know how much of that perception is reality, but that is a perception amongst a lot of administrators. But I don't know what that perception is for physicians. So physicians, maybe they talk and know hey, if I sell to private equity, my staff may change. And so I just don't know if there's a hurdle to how do you overcome. They may not be telling you because they are worried that you may go get a new job, or you'll lose your job, or
I love that question. That question comes up actually quite a bit. So I can tell you firsthand. So I was a private practice administrator in radiation oncology several decades ago. My practice was sold to private equity. I was the administrator, and I actually got promoted as a result of this. And so I have knowledge about that path as well as sitting on the other side. Fast forward to today, here's the answer to your question. When it comes to administrators, no way, shape, and form will they get fired when it comes to private equity, unless the doctor wants them to get fired for a variety of reasons and just doesn't have the backbone to do it. So he will tell private equity, as part of this transaction, please get rid of the administrator, or any other staff for that matter. All staff gets carried along with regards to private equity, with the exception of one group, and that is billing. If your billing is outsourced to some company, that will cease to exist post-sale to private equity. If you do your billing in-house, that will also cease to exist. Now, they do not fire the billing people. They just find other jobs for them, do financial counseling, those kind of things like that. But patient responsibility, those kind of things. But your in-house billing staff will not be sending out claims and calling insurance company to collect money. With regards to the promotion thing that I talked about, so it depends upon the size of the private equity, where your practice is located at, what the saturation is with a particular private equity in your market. Having said all of that, what we've seen a lot of times is that if you are a capable, comes to mind for lack of a better term, administrator, what they'll do is they always need an administrator, office manager, practice manager, or whatever you talk, right, at all of these sites. But then they like to have an operational person. Sometimes they call them like a regional vice president that has to get on their bicycle, so to speak, and oversee like more practices. So, and that happens all the time. It's quite popular. So you would maybe as an administrator of your practice today, your practice size sells to private equity. Good news, bad news. You may no longer be the administrator solely for that practice. You're no longer an administrator at all for that practice. You have now been elevated to be overseeing the administrators for a particular market area, and they'll hire another administrator for your former practice. So a lot of good things that happen. But yeah, nobody gets fired as part of the transaction ever. But what does happen, and oftentimes staff do not know this, but it's behind the scenes as part of the due diligence process that the doctor says, for example, this administrator's got to go, this nurse has to go, and they'll just do that as part of the transaction.
It's interesting because you have people who are probably pretty close in regards to the history of themselves, the administrator and a physician who owns a practice. And I could see some other reasons that would pop up as to why they may not share the information. For instance, if the physician ever negatively spoke about the idea of a transaction earlier, it's really hard for our brains to change how we speak about something to people. So if we talk to our administrator and say, man, can you believe that other practice sold to private equity? It's going to be really hard to bring that up if you want to sell down the road. So as an administrator, as the leader of the practice, to me, it seems best case scenario to always be the person that's truly driving. It's you're the one with your hands on the steering wheel and foot on the gas and brake. And it's hard to be in a bad position no matter what goes on if you're truly driving that practice. Is that off base in any way, Nick?
No, you're exactly right. In fact, for ENT is no different than any other specialty, and that is this. Doctors, yeah, okay, they own the practice, but I see the doctors as the clinical leaders of the practice. I see the administrator as the business leader of the practice. And I kind of get on my soapbox for any administrator that is a former clinical person, let's say a nurse. You're no longer clinical. Your job is to actually run the business, the books, the contracts, the vendors, you name it. So yeah, you're exactly right. And I think when you see practices that work really well in harmony between the doc and the administrator, it's that, right? It's that the doc is taking care of everything clinical, the administrator is taking care of everything business and doing such a good job that the physician component respects the administrator, values their opinion with regards to business, and basically like a president or CEO company giving the doctor good, succinct advice from a business standpoint, so that the doctor can make business type decisions. But yes.
What about an administrator who's with a practice? There's been no discussion. How would you suggest an administrator bring up this concept? So, for instance, the business owning physician is moving along in their career. Things are going well. There's never been a discussion of what the next step is, but we know we can't, live forever. The business can't be as it is forever. Is there a way that an administrator should bring this topic up to get a sense of what are the future plans?
Yes, there are. So let's assume there's no third party there, like the accountant or a financial advisor or an attorney, where these kind of conversations might kind of come up naturally. If not, at a minimum, the administrator can just say to the doc, look, I I listened to this podcast, I read this particular article, I went to this conference, and they're all just saying, hey, doc, that think ahead, you know what I mean? 5, 10 years at least, like that, depending upon what you're wanting to do. Just drop that just for starters like that. There could be other people in the kind of surrounding area, which the doc would already know about as well. Hey, our competitor, for lack of a better term, sold these two practices, just merged, you know what I mean? And just ask the question, is that anything you've ever thought about? Is that anything of interest, something kind of along those lines. And even with other specialties, right? So ENT and allergy, for example, are more and more getting tied around the knot to each other. So it could be allergy practices, pure allergy practices that are in the area that are doing some sort of transaction. Doesn't have to be with private equity, just something along those lines. And just start the conversation there. Look, it doesn't hurt to ask, right? You never know until you drop the thing.
Yeah.
And I think just approach it from the standpoint of, again, as a valued administrator, business savvy partner, if you will, looking out for the interest of the practice, this, that, and the other. Have you just ever thought about this? And sometimes the doctors may just wave them off. You know what I mean? If your timing could be bad, if you hit them during a clinic day, and maybe wave you off. But then sometimes the doctor will come back and say, hey, what were you talking about? What was it that you read? Can you send that article to me? Can you something along those lines like that? And that kind of starts it that way.
Seems like that's like a taboo with like everything, like we're talking about retirement just in any profession, or like talking with your parents about what they're going to do with the family, whatever, the car or the cabin or the jewelry. I don't know, but like there's like a taboo not to talk about it. It's like don't touch that. And I think we just need to break that uncomfort. It's not something that needs to be uncomfortable. It can just be, it's an important thing to talk about. It doesn't have to be so dark and dreary,
Right.
Yeah. And there could be an impetus. I mean, I've kind of given you big broad brushstrokes. There could be an impetus in a particular practice. Let's say, for example, the debt load is getting high, right? And hey, what are the options to get out of this, right? Well, I guess you could take out a loan, you know what I mean? There's a lot of things you could do. You could hire some physician partners, or we have these docs. Have you thought about making them partners? It doesn't have to be about selling your practice, right? Solo doc, 3 docs in a practice. Mid-levels don't count, right? When we're talking this conversation, 3 docs in a practice, but it's a solo owner. The debt load's high. Have you ever thought about constructing a buy-in for these other guys? Kind of share the load, share the wealth a little bit, or yes, potentially shed some of your liabilities by doing some sort of merger or acquisition. So it could be a number of different things like that. I will tell you that we're kind of getting a little farther from COVID, but right after COVID, this was a little bit easier of a conversation for those doctors that hadn't thought about that, right? Those doctors that had to take out personal loans with personal guarantees in order to meet payroll, and they hadn't had to do that since they started their practice. It was a wake-up call, right? So those doctors, guys and gals that were 60 years old, 70 years old, something like that, it was a wake-up call, right? And so it was a good time to have that conversation. Now that we're past it, everybody's like, oh, okay, we're all good to go now. We're humming along. But anyway, I digress, but it could just be a little something along those lines on the books that the administrator could speak really well to as a starter conversation.
Also just thinking about the idea of being invited to the table as a discussion. If you're the person leading the discussion, guess what? You're at the table, Right. So if you're saying something like, I'm learning about what's necessary to be able to participate in an exit, if that's ever your goal, and they're saying 6 to 10 years planning, I just want to give you a heads up. Like, you just elevated yourself as a point of knowledge, something where now this person who is wondering, how am I going to do this? I don't really know where to start. Now they're likely going to start with you. So I think it's a really good suggestion that you gave, Nick. Nick, I really
good experience for the administrator, because like you said, what if all of a sudden you do this for your practice and you decide for whatever reason you're going to relocate later on, different specialty, same specialty, doesn't matter, and now you have that because you've that knowledge, because you experienced, because you've been through it before, and you can approach that subject with your new practice.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's great. And you are going to be giving even more details, because you are a speaker at the upcoming CENT annual conference, which is in Kansas City, September 9th through 12th. So for listeners, if you're not registered for the event, go register. It's really an incredible conference. And then also put on your schedule to watch Nick. The title of your talk is Inside Scoop to Acquisitions, Due Diligence, and Valuations. So I think that'd be very valuable. And then also, Nick has said if anyone listening has more questions or wants to chat with him, feel free to go up to him at the conference, but also you can find him on LinkedIn and message him there. And we'll put that in the show notes. Nick, I really appreciate you taking the time and spending it with us and our audience today. This is important information and it's really valuable.
Thank you all. I appreciate your time as well.
Thanks for listening to the Practice Leader Podcast. If you're feeling the weight of challenges in your practice, know this: the problems you're struggling with today don't have to remain problems. There is a path forward, and you're not walking it alone.
Each week, we'll be here with insights, ideas, and real-world conversations to help you move forward from chaos to clarity.
See you next week.